The International Chicago O'Hare Airport looked like a controlled chaos anthill that hot Friday afternoon. The endless queues, the loudspeakers vomiting boarding calls, children running between adults' legs, all composed the usual symphony of one of the United States' largest hubs. Amid the collective rush, few noticed the firm, albeit slowed, stride of a gray-haired woman making her way through the terminal, holding an elegant carved wooden cane. Her simple lavender dress swayed gently with each determined step. Martha Ellington knew exactly where she was and where she was headed. In her eyes, there was a serenity that few could maintain amid the collective stress of an airport. In her other hand, she carried a small dark leather purse, compact, practical, the kind of item only someone supremely self-assured would choose for a long trip. She was the sort of woman who didn't need to flaunt anything to be noticed. Not far off, young flight attendant Lauren Whitaker was checking her passenger list at Orion Airlines boarding gate, a prestigious carrier that prided itself on service excellence, at least on paper. Lauren wore her impeccable uniform as if it were armor, a dark blue blazer, a skirt down to the knees, and a tight blonde bun carefully pinned atop her head. Her blue eyes scanned the approaching faces of first-class passengers with a mix of superiority and critical vigilance. She had been trained to identify potential problems before they settled into seats 1A or 2B, and at that moment, upon seeing Martha Ellington approach the priority line, her whole body seemed to stiffen. A cold look crossed her face, as if she had automatically decided that this modestly dressed lady must be lost, or up to something improper. Lauren advanced 2 steps, physically blocking Martha's path like a guard dog at a forbidden gate. "Excuse me," she said in a polite tone, though poisoned by suspicion. "The economy-class boarding line is in the other direction." Surprised, Martha paused. For an instant she regarded Lauren as one observes a tantruming child, no hate in her gaze, only sad curiosity. Then, with world-calm composure, she replied, "My ticket is for first class. I'm at the correct gate." Lauren forced a tense smile, the type that precedes a veiled act of hostility. "Then please show it," she insisted, extending her hand with authority. By then, a few heads had discreetly turned to watch what seemed to be yet another small public humiliation. One of those so many had witnessed, but few dared interrupt. Unhurried, Martha opened her purse, removed a carefully folded ticket and handed it over. Lauren took the paper as if handling something filthy. One look at it made her expression turn sour. She knew the ticket was legitimate. The code, the flight number, seat 1A, everything was correct. Yet some part of her simply refused to accept that this ordinary woman belonged there. Driven by an irrational impulse and aware of the silent audience around her, Lauren tore Martha's ticket into small pieces, letting them fall to the floor like sad confetti. "First class is reserved for suitable passengers," she declared, in a voice loud enough to cut through the terminal's tension. The impact was immediate. An awkward silence engulfed the boarding gate. Some people lowered their heads, others discreetly pulled out phones to record the moment. Martha, standing before the scraps of her ticket on the floor, did not cry. She did not scream. She merely looked at Lauren with a profound sadness, laden with decades of similar experiences. In a steady voice, without raising her tone, she said, "You have no idea how big a mistake you've just made." Then, as if not the victim but the true judge of the scene, she bent with dignity to retrieve her cane from the floor and stepped aside, giving space for what would come next. In the crowd, a man in a dark suit hurried forward. Victor Hammond, Orion Airlines Director of Operations, arrived at the boarding gate with the expression of someone who already knew what to expect. He stopped in front of Martha, made a small bow, rare coming from him, and, loudly enough for everyone to hear, said, "Ms. Ellington, I apologize on behalf of the airline. This situation is absolutely unacceptable." A murmur ran through the crowd. Lauren turned as white as paper. She began to understand, too late, that the woman she had just humiliated was no ordinary passenger. Victor then faced Lauren, his gaze bearing down like a crushing weight. "Do you know who this woman is, Miss Whitaker? She is the founder of Orion Airlines, our CEO. Without her, none of us would be here." Lauren Whitaker's mind seemed to spin like an out-of-control whirlwind as she tried to process what Victor Hammond had just announced before everyone. The founder, the CEO, the woman she had insulted, accused of fraud, and publicly humiliated was in fact the reason she even had that job. In seconds, blood drained from her face. The rigid posture that once made her feel invincible now seemed incapable of supporting her. Around her, the passengers' gazes shifted quickly from mere curiosity to a mixture of horror and contempt. In an instant, the entire structure of false authority Lauren had built over the years collapsed like a sandcastle struck by an unexpected wave. She wanted to disappear but couldn't. Reality held her in place, facing the woman she had underestimated, belittled, and tried to erase with her prejudice. Victor wasted no time. In a cold, utterly controlled voice, he asked Lauren to hand over her identification badge immediately and escorted her away from the boarding gate while an assistant took over the first-class boarding announcements. Each step she took was followed by heavy stares, recording phones, muffled sighs. Shame clung to her body like a second skin. Deep down, Lauren knew she had crossed an irreversible line. And worse, she knew it had been over something so small, so petty, so unjustifiable, that no apology in the world could erase the mark she had left. While Lauren was being led away, Martha Ellington remained standing by the gate, serene as an ancient rock, her cane resting lightly on the floor, her eyes roaming the astonished faces around her. There was no pride in her posture, nor vengeance. She was simply the silent presence of someone who had seen the face of prejudice countless times, and now chose to respond with something transcending anger. When Victor returned, he bowed once more and, with deep respect, offered Martha a new boarding pass. She accepted without a word, merely nodding slightly, and proceeded toward the aircraft, where the true unfolding of that day would begin to take shape. Meanwhile, Lauren was taken to a reserved backstage room in the terminal. There she waited, seated on a cold plastic chair, hands trembling and heart racing, for the arrival of the directors who had decided her fate would be discussed that very afternoon. The silence of the room was pierced only by the mechanical ticking of a wall clock, each tick sounding like a countdown to her inevitable judgment. She knew no excuse could wipe away what she had done. She also knew it wasn't just about losing her job. It was about losing something far deeper: her honor, her reputation, and the image she had maintained of herself as a correct, impartial professional. When the directors arrived, Victor and two board members, Lauren tried to stand, but her legs barely responded. She was instructed to remain seated while the evidence was presented: videos recorded by passengers, Victor's testimony, and that of employees who witnessed the scene, even audio captured by the airport's internal security system. Everything, every piece of information painted the same picture: a woman who, driven by unconscious prejudices and arrogance, had unjustly mistreated a passenger without even attempting to understand the situation. Lauren listened in silence, her face aflame, the weight of humiliation crushing her chest. Finally, after a long presentation of the facts, Victor spoke. His voice was cutting but without raising volume. "Miss Whitaker, Miss Ellington chose not to demand your immediate dismissal. However, she made it clear that this incident cannot be ignored." Lauren's eyes widened, confused. Part of her had expected, even wished, to be fired on the spot as the ultimate punishment for her guilt. But Victor continued. Instead, she proposed something more difficult: that you undergo an intensive re-education program, personally supervised by senior management. For 6 months, you will attend trainings, seminars, and immersions on diversity, respect, and equity. At the end of the program, you will be evaluated. Should you demonstrate real change, you may rebuild your career. If you fail, you will be permanently dismissed from Orion Airlines. The ensuing silence was deafening. Lauren didn't know if it was a blessing or a sentence. Her wounded pride wanted to refuse, to walk out and never look back. But something, deep inside, whispered otherwise. Perhaps for the first time in her life, she was facing the opportunity to truly change. Without lifting her head, only with a hoarse, trembling voice, she replied, "I accept." And thus, as the clock in the room marked the end of an afternoon she would never forget, Lauren Whitaker took the first step toward a journey that would break her, rebuild her, and perhaps free her from burdens she hadn't even known she carried. Lauren Whitaker's first day in the re-education program was more humiliating than any dismissal would have been. Wearing simple clothes without the uniform that once gave her a false sense of importance, she arrived early at Orion Airlines training center. The building was imposing in its silence, glass and steel, as cold as the reality she now faced. No welcoming smile awaited her at reception, no opening ceremony, only a temporary badge reading "Participant." stripped of any title or role. It felt as though they had taken not just her position, but her identity. And that was precisely the goal, to make her understand that here she was superior to no one. The first session began in a simple room, no luxury, only chairs arranged in a circle and a screen projecting the module title, Invisible Prejudice, Recognizing What We Refuse to See. The instructor, an Asian-American man named Dr. Samuel Cho, had a calm yet firm voice and eyes that seemed to pierce any facade. "Today," he began, "we will not talk about overt racism. We will talk about the small choices we make every day, about whom we consider trustworthy, whom we look at with suspicion, whom we judge without knowing." Lauren felt a knot in her stomach. His words seemed directed straight at her, even though no one knew the real reason for her presence there. Throughout that torturous morning, Lauren was exposed to videos, testimonies, and case studies showing how racial prejudice manifests in subtle yet devastating ways in everyday life. Footage of black passengers being asked to prove their right to their seats, of candidates rejected without plausible explanation, of elderly women being ignored at service counters. With each example she watched, it was like a knife twisting in her conscience. She tried to rationalize, "I'm not racist, I was just doing my job." But every attempt at justification crumbled before the silent brutality of the presented facts. In the following days, the sessions grew even harder. Lauren was forced to participate in role plays where she had to take the place of discriminated individuals, literally. She wore simple clothes, was treated with staged distrust by colleagues, was ignored in simulated customer service scenarios. The purpose was to make her feel the humiliation she had inflicted on so many, even unconsciously. And it worked. Each disdainful look, each dismissive gesture, each invisible barrier erected around her chipped away at her self-esteem, just as she had done to others. One afternoon, after a particularly painful exercise, Lauren found herself sitting alone in the empty training center cafeteria. The tray before her lay untouched. She felt crushed by nameless shame. Her eyes fixed on her phone, where months earlier she had received praise and likes for glamorous travel photos as a flight attendant. Now it all seemed so small, so empty. She remembered Martha Ellington, how she had stood tall over humiliation like a mountain weathering a storm. And for the first time, Lauren wished she could be someone worthy of that kind of strength, of that immutable dignity. The training was not limited to emotional experiences. There were mandatory readings, books about the history of slavery, segregation, and the psychological impact of subtle racism. Lauren dove into these texts like a castaway seeking firm ground. Many nights she cried alone, overwhelmed by the discovery that her entire life had been shaped not only by what she had learned, but by what she had never bothered to question. She realized she wasn't just a flight attendant who had made a mistake. She was a woman who desperately needed to learn to be better. Nearly 2 months passed since the program began, when Lauren received notice of a one-on-one meeting with none other than Martha Ellington. Upon reading the name, her heart pounded uncontrollably. It was not a commonplace test. It was the opportunity, or verdict, of being evaluated directly by the person she had so publicly and painfully hurt. For hours before the meeting, Lauren couldn't focus on anything else. Every word she had rehearsed felt hollow, given the depth of the debt she carried. How could she meet Martha's eyes? How could she find words worthy of being heard? When the conference room door opened and Martha Ellington entered, Lauren nearly forgot to breathe. The CEO walked with her usual serene elegance, her polished wooden cane in her right hand, her dark eyes deep pools of experience. She wore a simple charcoal grey ensemble, yet her presence dominated the room like a silent empress. Lauren rose immediately, body stiff with tension, face aflame. Martha did not smile, nor did she greet warmly, but she did not convey hostility either. Her expression was a cold calm reserved for moments when one tests not just someone's competence, but the weight of their soul. Sitting at the table, Martha placed her cane gently beside the chair and folded her hands on the wooden surface. For a long, suffocating moment, only their breathing filled the space. Then, in a low but piercing voice, Martha said, "Before we begin, I want you to tell me, in your own words, what you have learned so far." Lauren swallowed hard, the words fighting to form sense within her. She did not want to sound rehearsed or recite decorated formulas, so she spoke from the heart. "I've learned that what I did was not an isolated mistake. It reflected something much larger that I carried without realizing. Prejudices, judgments, lack of compassion. I didn't see it, but now I see. And that scares me. Martha remained motionless, her eyes analyzing every word, every hesitation. After a moment, she asked, "And do you understand why, on that day, I did not react with anger? Why I did not shout or argue?" Lauren hesitated before answering, feeling the weight of the question. "Because you have been through that before, many times. Because you learned that your dignity does not depend on others' approval or reactions." The answer made Martha tilt her head slightly, as if acknowledging that, even superficially, there was a glimmer of understanding. But the test was not over. Martha leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on Lauren like invisible hooks, and posed the hardest question. "If I were not who I am, if I were just an ordinary lady with no titles, no influence, would you have apologized?" The ensuing silence was oppressive. Lauren felt the ground vanish beneath her feet. It was impossible to lie there. And she knew it. Every fiber of her being knew the true, terrible answer. Swallowing, she forced herself to face her raw shame. "No," she whispered, almost inaudibly. "If you were just another passenger, I would have moved on without thinking about what I did. And that is what shames me most." For a brief moment, something soft, almost imperceptible, crossed Martha's face. It wasn't exactly a smile. It was more like a silent acknowledgement that truth, however painful, was still better than hypocrisy. She rose slowly, picked up her cane, and before exiting left one final lesson. Acknowledging one's own fault is the first step. But remember, Miss Whitaker, repentance without change is merely self-pity. I will watch your actions, not your words. With those words echoing in her ears, Lauren sat alone, feeling the birth of a new responsibility she could no longer ignore. The weeks following the meeting with Martha Ellington marked the beginning of a new internal chapter for Lauren. It was not something visible at first glance, like a uniform change or a new position. It was subtler, harder, and infinitely more painful. The change happened in silences, in thoughts that once passed unnoticed but now surfaced as alerts, in gestures that had to be unlearned and rebuilt from their roots. Lauren knew that to become someone different, she would have to wage a daily war against her automatic reflexes, the very ones that had shaped her behavior for years without question. The re-education program remained rigorous. Each week brought new study modules, practical exercises, and feedback sessions. This time, however, Lauren was not merely fulfilling tasks to mark attendance. She threw herself into the work wholeheartedly. She spent nights reading accounts of discrimination suffered by minority passengers. She watched documentaries on the unseen consequences of prejudice in the corporate environment. She attended extracurricular seminars on social justice, even when they weren't mandatory. She began listening more than speaking, a simple but revolutionary gesture for someone who always believed she knew more than she needed to. Her first true test of transformation came unexpectedly. During a simulated in-flight service, part of the program, Lauren was assigned to assist passengers in a deliberately stressful scenario. Delays, complaints, customers of varied appearances, and socio-economic profiles. In the past, she would have silently evaluated each passenger, unconsciously deciding who deserved a smile and who merited only cold efficiency. This time, she strove to treat everyone with the same genuine kindness, regardless of appearance, clothing, or tone of voice. During the simulation, an elderly black woman, dressed simply and carrying only a small worn purse, approached Lauren asking for help locating her seat. Lauren felt a tightening in her chest, a visceral memory of the day that changed her life forever. But she took a deep breath and responded with the warmest hospitality. She gently held the woman's bag, walked beside her down the simulated aisle, and made sure she was comfortably seated before moving on to assist other passengers. It wasn't merely courtesy, it was a conscious choice of respect. A small, invisible victory, but colossal in its meaning. At the end of the simulation, Dr. Samuel Cho asked everyone to gather for evaluation. To Lauren's surprise, he publicly praised her for the genuine care she had shown. "Miss Whitaker," he said, "today you demonstrated something beyond technique. You showed humanity, and that is what transforms a good professional into someone capable of making a difference in the world." His words warmed her heart, but also brought a pang of sadness, a reminder of all she had ignored and lost before reaching that point. Then she received an internal communication from Orion Airlines. Martha Ellington wanted to see her again, not in a formal meeting, not in a cold conference room, but at a private lunch at company headquarters, just the two of them. It was both an invitation and a new test. Lauren knew it would not be enough to impress with eloquent words or book quotes. Martha would observe who she had become, and that could not be feigned. On the morning of the lunch, Lauren dressed modestly, a simple beige blouse and discreet black pants. Nothing that screamed sophistication. She wanted her new attitude to speak louder than her appearance. Entering the private dining room, she found Martha already seated by a large window overlooking the runway. Morning sunlight gilded the frame of her serene face, reinforcing her almost mythical image in Lauren's eyes. This time, as she approached, Lauren did not bow out of mere politeness. She bowed out of genuine respect born of understanding, pain, and gratitude. Martha indicated the chair before her with a brief gesture and offered a small, almost imperceptible but real smile. When Lauren sat, she felt for the first time that she might not merely be judged, but welcomed. It was only the beginning, of course. Much remained to be proven. But in that moment she knew. She had earned at the very least the right to try. The lunch with Martha Ellington was not an interrogation nor a formal event steeped in corporate protocol. It was a simple conversation, yet heavy with meaning. Martha spoke little about the airport incident or the re-education program Lauren had been undergoing. Instead, she asked about Lauren's vision for herself moving forward. "Where do you see yourself, Miss Whitaker?" she asked with a gaze that seemed to penetrate flesh to touch the soul. Holding her teacup with both hands to conceal a slight tremor, Lauren answered with the honesty she had learned to cultivate. "I see myself striving to be someone who not only serves but respects, someone who transforms, even if just a little, the space they occupy." Martha did not respond immediately. She simply observed in silence for what seemed an eternity, until finally smiling, a discreet smile that carried the sense of a door left ajar. A few days after that meeting, Lauren was summoned again to Orion Airlines' administrative headquarters. She thought it would be another step in her re-evaluation. However, upon arrival, she was met with an unexpected proposal. Martha and the board wanted her to assume a temporary role as assistant in the airline's internal diversity and inclusion trainings. It would not be an official or permanent position, rather, in Victor Hammond's words, a continuous testing ground. Lauren would help develop workshops, accompany new hires during their first weeks, and serve as an example of conduct, all under constant evaluation. The challenge was enormous, not only because it would be a public responsibility, but because Lauren knew she would face suspicious glances from colleagues aware of her recent past and newcomers who would naturally wonder who this woman was that had once nearly destroyed her own career through prejudice. The scar from the incident had not vanished. On the contrary, it was a visible mark, a story whispered down the airline's corridors. Some would avoid her, some would judge her incapable of change, some would see only the error and not the effort. But for the first time in her life, Lauren did not want to escape the weight. She wanted to carry it, not as a burden, but as a constant reminder of who she refused to become again. Her first workshop was almost a complete disaster. She stuttered through presentations, hesitated when explaining basic concepts of unconscious bias, and felt the latent tension whenever she asked the group a question. She caught the cold stare of a former colleague slicing through her like a spear. But instead of fleeing, she stayed. Instead of justifying herself, she listened. After the first session ended, rather than running home in tears, she sought out the senior instructor and asked for honest feedback, and accepted every critique with the humility of someone who knew she was still learning to live differently. In the following weeks, small changes became visible. Lauren began developing her own methodologies to make the classes more humane. She brought everyday examples, avoided jargon, and spoke of her own failures. Not to absolve herself, but to show that acknowledging error is the first step toward preventing its recurrence. Gradually, suspicion gave way to curiosity, and then to empathy. Some participants, especially the newer ones, began seeking her out after workshops to ask questions, share personal stories, or simply say thank you. One afternoon, while gathering materials after a training session, a young flight attendant approached her. She had fair skin, hair in braids, and eyes carrying a mix of doubt and hope. "Do you really believe people can change?" she asked, as if entrusting a small piece of her own heart to Lauren's answer. Lauren paused before speaking. Then she smiled, without arrogance, without need for defense. "I don't just believe it," she said. "I'm trying to prove it every day." 6 months had passed since that fateful day Lauren Whitaker tore up Martha Ellington's ticket at the boarding gate. 6 months of internal reconstruction, sleepless nights of study, days facing judgmental stares and uncomfortable questions. And now, for the first time since then, Lauren had the opportunity to return to what she loved most, working aboard a commercial flight. But there was a special condition. It would be an inaugural flight celebrating Orion Airlines' new inclusion partnership, and among the first-class passengers would be none other than Martha Ellington. A perfect circle closing before her eyes, testing how far she truly had changed. In the crew locker room, while adjusting her new uniform, simple, unadorned yet immaculate, Lauren looked at herself in the mirror. The reflection still showed the woman from before, efficient blonde hair, straight posture, discreet makeup. But inside, everything was different. Gone was the armor of arrogance and the weight of presumed superiority. In its place was a painful yet beautiful awareness, the realization that every passenger she served carried an invisible story, and that it was her duty as both professional and human being to respect each one equally. When boarding began, Lauren maintained calm. Every passenger was greeted with a genuine smile, not a forced one. Every helpful gesture, every greeting carried the sincerity that now defined who she was. Then, amid the bustle, she saw Martha Ellington approaching the gate. The CEO walked with her familiar, tranquil dignity, cane in hand, serene gaze. For a brief moment, Lauren's heart pounded, but she refused to let nerves seize her. She stepped forward, offered a respectful smile, and said, "Welcome aboard, Ms. Ellington. It is an honor to have you with us today." Martha merely inclined her head slightly, her expression unreadable, and proceeded to her seat. During the flight, Lauren passed through first class several times, attending to every passenger with equal care. She did not seek to please only Martha. Her effort was universal. For the weary businessman in seat 2B, the young mother with a restless baby in 3A, the elderly woman traveling alone in 1C. What once was selective was now unconditional. With each small act of kindness, it was as if Lauren erased a bit more of the scars left by her past mistakes. At one point, while serving tea to Martha, Lauren leaned in slightly and asked in a low but firm voice, "Is there anything I can do to make your journey more comfortable, Ms. Ellington?" Martha, who until then had been reading in silence, closed her book gently and regarded Lauren. There was something different in her eyes, not the cold severity of the past, but a restrained warmth, as if she recognized a difficult journey, walked with genuine effort. After a few seconds, she replied, "Continue just as you are, Miss Whitaker, serving not only with efficiency but with respect." Those simple words carried within them the consecration of a long, arduous but victorious process. The rest of the flight passed in an atmosphere both light and almost solemn. Lauren's colleagues, many of whom had distrusted her months before, now observed her renewed demeanor with surprise and respect. Even the captain, once skeptical of her return, made a point of congratulating her discreetly before landing. It was confirmation that genuine change, one not announced in empty speeches but proven through silent acts, had truly taken root. When the plane touched down in New York and passengers began disembarking, Martha Ellington was among the last to leave. Before heading to the jet bridge, she paused before Lauren, who stood firm at the exit doorway, and said in a low yet clear voice for the nearby crew to hear, "Keep growing. The world needs more people willing to change." Then she gave a small, genuine smile and walked on, leaving Lauren with tears in her eyes and a heart lighter than ever. The plane had emptied, and the New York airport buzzed outside, but Lauren Whitaker lingered a few minutes longer in the now empty cabin. She looked around at the silent seats, the aisle lit by cool lights, the windows reflecting the runway outside. It was hard to believe that months earlier, the same setting had been the stage for the worst humiliation of her life, and now it symbolized her silent redemption. Every small detail seemed charged with meaning: polite service, unconditional respect for passengers, a discreet but firm demeanor in every new situation. Lauren was no longer an agent of the silent prejudice that had crept into her actions without her noticing. She was now a silent fighter against it. In the days following that flight, Lauren continued her work in Orion Airlines' training department. But now, her voice carried a different power. When she spoke of diversity, inclusion, and respect, it was not from a corporate manual, but from the pain she had lived, the mistake she had made, and the transformation she had undergone. New flight attendants sitting before her in workshops saw a woman who spoke without arrogance, without masks, someone who laid herself bare, publicly admitted her errors, and showed in practice that real change is possible, but demands courage. One especially symbolic morning, Lauren was invited to lead an open training session for the entire company. In the Orion headquarters auditorium, before dozens of employees from all sectors, pilots to maintenance technicians, she took the stage with cold hands of nervousness, but a steady gaze. She shared her story without filters. She spoke of the day she tore up a passenger's ticket based solely on appearance. She recounted how, out of pride, she tried to justify herself until confronted by an undeniable reality. Above all, she spoke of the agony of recognizing herself as part of the problem, and of the ongoing effort to choose day after day to be part of the solution. When she finished, the auditorium fell into a profound silence, heavy with meaning. There was no immediate applause or murmuring, just that kind of silence born when words strike something deep beyond the surface. Some people averted their eyes, others seemed on the verge of tears. Lauren knew she no longer needed approval. Her mission was not to be forgiven, but to use her experience to prevent others from repeating the same mistakes. That afternoon, as she walked home, Lauren passed a mural outside Orion Airlines, displaying the company's new values: respect, diversity, inclusion. She smiled upon seeing beneath the motto a small phrase signed by Martha Ellington: "It's not enough to transport passengers. We must carry their stories with respect." Lauren felt those words sink deep into her chest. She knew the fight against one's own prejudices would never fully end. It was an eternal path, a daily effort. But for the first time in her life, she was willing to walk it, not because someone forced her, but because she now understood the true value of seeing the humanity in others. At home, before sleeping, Lauren opened a small notebook where she recorded her learnings. On the last page, she wrote a simple phrase that carried everything she had lived up to that point. Real change begins when we stop protecting ourselves from discomfort and start confronting it. She closed the notebook, turned off the light, and fell asleep, not as one who forgets the past, but as one who chooses to use it as a guide to build a better future.